Welcome everyone to our fourth podcast. Today we have Trevor Ketchen, who is a keen spearfisher and has spent many years in the water and currently works for Adreno Spearfishing. So welcome, Trevor.
Hello, pleasure to meet you all.
So I guess so the listeners can get to know you a little bit. Let's ask you a pretty fundamental question, and that is, what does spearfishing mean to you as a person?
As a person, it was originally I started kind of as a way to give up other bad habits in my life and focus on something else. So I went into spearfishing, and then over time that kind of became the one main thing in my life, apart from family, that I enjoy doing and try to do as often as possible. I find it really centers you and gives you perspective in life. Being under the water and in the ocean, it really brings you back to the bare necessities of what you need to survive, kind of thing.
That's awesome. Would you like to share some of your more memorable experiences while spearfishing?
It's difficult because luckily, because you're so far out of your own element, pretty much every time you go out, there'll be something memorable, something that will kind of stick in your mind. I've been very privileged to get to swim with whale sharks, pretty much every species of shark, manta rays, whales, most of your different dolphins. It's a very enjoyable hobby. It's like just immersing yourself into a completely alien world. Yeah, it's very enjoyable. Was there a specific kind of memorable experience that you would like to know about?
Oh, well, I mean, let's start with a really memorable catch, for one. Start with that.
Let me think. There's been a few. It's different for everybody. Depends on what you really go out and look for. Probably one of my more memorable catches is, funnily enough, a very small fish. And it was a type of parrotfish that are meant to only exist in 60 meters of water and deeper. And I managed to catch one of those. I wasn't that deep. I'm only around the 40-meter mark, but it was still a good fish to pick up. But in saying that, it was only about like that big. So,
okay. What species was it?
They're called a high fin parrotfish.
Oh,
they're very
cool.
Yeah, they don't grow very big, but only little.
Mm-hmm.
So no, that's quite a memorable one. That took a long time to kind of find and track down one.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I've ID'd a few of those in my other job. Really,
nice.
Really cool, bright red terminal phase.
Oh, very fancy. But it's good fun. One rabbit hole that I enjoy going down, which is the identification and finding of more of the unusual species while I'm out there. It's good fun.
So do you consider yourself more of like a species collector than a trophy guy?
I'm kind of a little bit of both. But yes, I'm more interested in trying to find the unusual things these days. When I was younger, I was more into the trophies and trying to find the bigger fish. Nowadays, I don't say no to a bigger fish, but I'm more going out looking for things I haven't found before, or things that are a little bit more uncommon or difficult to find.
Yeah, cool. What are you working on now at the moment? Is there something that is in the back of your head?
There's a few fish that I'd like to try and find, but nothing really specific. Recently, the Queensland Museum has separated a couple of the sea bream species. So trying to then now find each type of version to get my head around the differences between the two. Because for a long time, sea bream, they had the two different species as one. Yeah. So now that it's trying to learn what the exact differences are.
And then you've got to pick that out while free diving in 40 meters of water.
Yeah. And then learning the different silhouettes and the different body shapes. It's definitely a fun part of the hunting, is learning all the many different fish that you'll encounter. And you never stop. Just another thing on top of getting to be out there and hunt for your food in an environment completely separated from what your natural environment would be.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I mean, let's talk about the environment then. What's some of the more memorable habitats that you've had the privilege of spearfishing in?
I haven't got to travel too much. I've mostly done the East Coast, but even just within 8 hours drive north or south of where I am in Brisbane, we get phenomenal range in habitat areas, from completely reefs made entirely of rock and honeycombed, whereas you start heading north and you get to hang out more on the coral reefs and big plate corals and really nice areas up there in cleaner water. We also get some weed reefs off Brisbane, which is it's not like your really long weeds that grow all the way to the top. It's only about a foot tall, and the fish kind of hide in and through that, and that gives you a whole nother area with which to kind of hunt in. So you get to see a lot of really cool and different structure when you get out there.
Yeah, cool. So not so much with the pelagic stuff, like hanging out by fad?
We can definitely get a lot of pelagics. I don't tend to go out and hunt them specifically. I'll be looking along the bottom for the fish that are there, and the people with my dive buddies will usually be more looking for the pelagics that are coming through.
Yeah.
Have that as a trade-off, because I can usually get a little bit deeper than they can, so they like to chase the pelagics and I'll more hunt the bottom. But luckily, particularly off Brisbane, on the reefs where you'll be hunting the reef species, the pelagics will also come through intermittently, so you can kind of get a little.
Yeah, right. It's just like keep your eyes peeled for that.
Essentially, well, I actually run a small float that's reflective, and it's on about 20 meters cord. So when I get to the bottom, that pulls about 5 meters under the surface, and then that float will then pelagics to that float, and then my dive buddy can then go after the pelagics. So it also helps him to where I am, but then it also can help him catch a surface fish for themselves.
Yeah, right. So you're all sort of like pulling the teaser.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, right. Cool. So how long have you been spearfishing for?
Cool. That's a good question. I started when I was about 17, and I'm now, what am I? 34. So mass.
17 years, right in the middle.
They're not too bad. There's some who have been doing it. It's always good to meet those people and learn from them. Like everything, the more people you can talk to and meet who have been doing it for decades and decades, everyone you meet you can learn something from. So it's always good to have a chat with people who've been doing it for a while.
Yeah. I've got a few friends of mine who spearfish, and a couple of my really good friends just took it up. Like they're sort of new Australians, and they hadn't been here very long, and they decided, I like the idea of going out and hunting my own food. So that they went out, and then within, I want to say 6 to 8 months, Heather pinged herself a 30-kilo mulloway.
Oh, very nice.
Like just crack shot right through the brain, and wound up like hopping out onto the rock platform with all these fishermen going, what the?
That's what it's about. Like sometimes you'll just get incredible fish that you're not expecting, and that's just kind of part of the fun. You never know what you'll get when you head out there. But I warn them, and it's very addictive.
Yeah. I've sort of semi wanted to give it a go for a long time, but I have trouble tearing myself away from the line fishing. Like usually when the conditions are good enough, I'm like, I want to.
Difficult hobby to do line fishing and spearfishing. It's one of those ones where you kind of one or the other.
Yeah.
It's tricky because it does take a lot of effort.
Yeah. There's a lot of investment.
Hobby that kind of learn how to do it and what to look for, and like moon phases and tides, and there's a lot of other information you kind of have to learn to consistently find good fish, and to different between one and the other. So it'd be difficult to do.
Yeah. So did you kind of learn just informally by getting to know people around the place, or did you join a club?
At the start, it was a bit informal. I was working with at the time I was a carpenter, and I was working with another carpenter, and he was just talking about it one day at lunchtime, and then that afternoon I just went out and bought all the gear and kind of started out. His teaching style was more the fish are down there, swim down and get them. So it wasn't really teaching. And then after diving with him for a few months, I joined the Sunshine Coast Spearfishing Club, and that was a really good way to kind of meet people, and it certainly helped going to a club because you start to meet the older members who have been doing it for 40, 50 years, and who are the physical downslope away from diving hard, but they've got this absolute knowledge, and from saves you years and years of doing it the hard way kind of thing. Meet people and also glean information.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, those people are, I mean, even in line fishing, they're invaluable. They're the kinds of people who are like, just wait for the right time of year for the fish to come to you. Stop chasing them around.
I'll just be shaking their head at you, and you're like, why are you shaking their head? It's like, don't worry. You'll work it out. And then you come back and I know why you were shaking. And then they're like, okay, so now you want to learn? You're like, yes, I would like to learn.
You don't have to dive to 50 meters every time.
And if there's a thermocline on the reef, and go to the southern edge, and they'll be there. And you're like, okay. And then ow.
That's awesome.
That affect fish, and just slowly learning them.
Well, let's talk about those other fish that really are the focus of our app and this podcast, the sandpapery variety. What has your experience been? You know, like all those hundreds of hours you've spent spearfishing, what's your experience with sharks been like?
It has changed over the years. At the start, when I first started, there was still a lot of commercial shark fishing. So sharks were a lot more anxious around boats. They tended to stay away from boats. Over the years, as shark fishing then was taken away and got rid of in a lot of places, the sharks' mindset changed a lot from stay away from a boat to more come back towards the boats. And the boats, like any apex predator, they're going to take the most calories with the least effort. And they learned very quickly that by following boats and people, they can get injured fish more readily without having to work as much. So over the years, the sharks got a little bit more where you had to kind of keep an eye out for them. But we just kind of evolved over time with that. These days, if it's a particularly heavily fished area, we will work it more as a team. So one person will go down to shoot the fish, then the next person, as the gun goes off and you hear that shot or the click, they'll then go down and kind of increase your numbers in that area to fend off the fish.
Right.
It's difficult for the sharks to kind of get a meal. Like most things, it's all a big bluff, but the more difficult you can make it for them to get the feed, the less likely they are to continue trying to get those fish off you, which is difficult for poor line fishermen because they kind of can't go down and defend their catch. It's just food.
Yeah. So what do? You just charge the bastards, or?
Essentially, so you've got your gun and you just poke them as hard as you can. Again, it's a big bluff. In a fight, they would definitely win.
Yeah.
But you just want to be enough of a possible danger that when they weigh it up, how much they want that fish, the danger is pressing matter in their mind. Because the shark, again, I can't say I'm an expert. I haven't researched them or anything like that. But from my experiences, sharks don't want to be injured. If they're injured, they can't hunt, they can't get food. So the more likely you are to think that you're a threat, the more unlikely to try and steal your catch / eat you. But the eat you part's a very small percentage. It's
I mean, it makes sense, right? Like if you went to take a bite out of a hamburger and it poked a toothpick in your face, you'd not eat that hamburger.
Yeah. The same on land. Like whenever you go out to a national park, or I'm from talking with South African expats who I dive with, even their big game park, the first rules are to feed the animals, because then the animals will automatically go, well, that person is food.
Right.
So I can get food by hanging out with them. Whereas the more difficult you make it, they will be more inclined to kind of go and hunt their own food.
Yeah.
Saying that, another reason that we're noticing a lot more sharks in spearfishing is there's just the food is where we're spearfishing. There's a lot less food these days due to fishing activities. So all your green zones and protected areas and places where there's a prolific amount of food are all closer to shore. So, like anything, they're going to hang out where the best treats are.
Yeah. Right. So do you notice the sharks behave any different, like close to the boat versus, a little bit of a swim away from the boat?
It all depends on the kind of shark. In particular areas, particularly heavily fished reefs, places like Hutchinson Shoals is a prime example off the northern tip of Morton Island. On that reef, you'll actually see the sharks just following the boats when they're trolling and pulling lures, and they stay just far enough back behind the lure, but close enough that they're within range to hit whatever fish comes in, to the point where if you're out diving that reef, normally there's 20, 30, 40 boats on it. But on the Ocala, there aren't many boats on there. As soon as you pull up in the boat and jump in the water, there'll already be 3 to 4 sharks under the boat milling around, because you're the only boat out there for them to follow on that day. So they're certainly learning and developing habits. They're very clever. You don't give sharks credit you probably should for their intelligence. And they've worked very quickly that if you just hang around under the boat, eventually a fish is going to come up that can't run away.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's really interesting because one of the quite well-renowned scientists working for DAF at the moment, so Department of Agriculture and Fisheries over your way, Jonathan Mitchell, his research was indicating along the lines that sharks have a really strong, I guess, capacity for learning. And responding to auditory cues, like particular frequencies of sound, they're just straight onto it.
And the point where some commercial fishermen will change propellers every few weeks to alter the sound outboard so that sharks keep relearning what sound they're using, and they'll rotate through a few trying to get around that issue. A few of your charter operators will do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Clever though. Like, it makes sense.
Like anything, as your foe gets more intelligent, you yourself then have to get more intelligent to kind of adapt. Trick them. So, a couple of your started to rotate propellers to help with that situation.
So is there something you guys do as spearfishers to modify your sound output?
Not so much. We're lucky enough to be in the water and we can see the sharks and kind of fend them off and defend one-on-one directly with the sharks.
Right.
We will do is it's better to have higher numbers in the water. If you can have 2 or 3 people working together, you will lose phenomenally less fish to sharks, because then you can imagine it's no different to like when you're 17 or 18 and you're a little bit drunk and you might think about picking a fight with one bloke. If there's 4 blokes, you're like, maybe not.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can do that. That's fine.
Yeah.
So by having numbers in the water, you tend to have a lot less lost fish. And then, like I said before, and actively trying not to let them get that easy food.
Right. Yeah. So I guess everyone's got a game plan, and it just needs to be executed to stop the sharks associating you guys with food.
With easy food.
Yeah.
There is where it's particularly bad, and in those spots you physically have to dive with each other and work really few spots. Like there's one area off Fraser Island where a lot of trawlers anchor up to clean the decks, and in that you can't even physically get to the bottom for the sharks that come up. So that one, even though there's great fish there, it's just not worth diving that area anymore.
Right. The moment that shot goes off, they're all over it.
Goes off. I've got footage of the area, and you get in the water and you'll get about 3 meters down, and there'll be 3 meter plus bull sharks up on your level above you, and then there'll be 2 more kind of off to the side, and any noise hits the water, like a splash or an entry, they come up to investigate because they're so used to that splash being bycatch. They just live there. There's a lot of phenomenal fish there. The fish life, particularly the pelagics, are incredible for the same reason. There's always food, but we never manage to land any of them. They all get eaten.
Yeah. So do you find, some of the sharks are physically intimidating you as well, like as just hanging around for an opportunity, or? Not
so much. They tend, it depends on the species, to be honest. Certain sharks, like white tips, not aggressive, but super curious. They'll always investigate what you might be, because for them, floating debris equals food. That's just how they always come in, not in a way that I would call aggressive, but they'll get very close just to make sure that if you're not a threat, then you're food. So when they come in, you're watching them, and that it's not an easy meal. Bull sharks can be a little bit difficult and aggressive in dirty water. In clean water, they tend to be a lot more well behaved, but they are a dirty water kind of hunter. They work more their other senses, and so occasionally you'll get bumped by one of those if you're in particularly dirty water they're investigating what you are. I've been lucky so far just to get nudged and not bitten, so that's not so. The different whalers, depending on the species, dusky whalers can be a little bit aggressive when they're kind of trying to get between you and your fish. Not so much on the divers, but they'll be probably one of the more, I'm trying to think of the word. They don't swim in a set pattern. They're a lot more
erratic.
Yes, manic would be a good way to put it. Their behavior changes very rapidly. So with dusky whalers, you've got to keep an eye on them as well. Bronze whalers aren't too bad. They'll just steal your fish if they can. Tiger sharks are they'll sit just on the edge of viz and move in if they see a chance. Most of the time, they'll just cruise through just to see what you are. I've only really ever had one difficult experience with a tiger shark, and it was a vertical ambush hit as I was coming up from the bottom. Luckily, it's gun, which I had next to my leg. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have my right leg. And that was just a freak. It just happened that day. That was that one shark that obviously was hungry enough to go, I'll try and eat that thing. With fishing, very lucky. I think the only shark you really have to you can't trust in spearfishing would be great whites, just because they are a mammal hunter. And by spearfishing, you're creating yourself to be an ocean-going mammal, and their food is mammals. So with whites, you very rarely will trust them. You always keep a really good eye on a white, try and get out and kind of move locations if one's hanging around. They're just the only shark you can't really trust, because they'll go from just sitting there cruising along really slowly, full acceleration, and just like 2 kicks of their tail. So with white, to keep an eye on them particularly close. Luckily, in Queensland, we don't have as much of an abundance. They only kind of come through with the whales. So it's not so bad, but northern New South Wales would be a trickier place to dive.
We get them here. I'm in Wollongong, and they're quite often here. Lots of seals, and the local freedivers quite often like warn each other not to go to certain places at certain times of the year. So around now, when the cuttlefish start dying off, there's a quite well-known great white that rocks up to the same spot at a very close inshore beach called Bellambi that the local kids spearfish quite often. And it will be there, I assume, eating the dying cuttlefish, but also the odd seal that must be coming up for the cuttlefish as well. It's just...
they're the one shark that will have no qualms if you're small enough that you could food for it. But again, when they come in, you just bluff to make yourself as big and scary and pointy as you can, and hope they'll.
Do you find like the posture of your body in the water is important too? Like don't lay too flat, but stand upright, or not really?
Oh, not so much the posture. If you can control your heart rate and how calm you are, that certainly helps. The more scared or rapid your heart rate is, the more like prey you are on their sensory organs. Whereas if you're just calm in the water with them, your heart rate's still slow. You're moving to not in an aggressive way, but an assertive way. That tends to hold most sharks at bay.
Right.
Like in fences, a bull can go through it, but most of the time. Whereas if you're away, swimming erratically, you've got a high heart rate, those kind of signals, it's more like you're sending out more of a I'm scared, I'm prey kind of vibe.
Yeah, okay. It's like I'm not a soft target. Like I belong here.
Like what you teach your kids dogs as they're growing up don't like scream and run away from the dog.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's instant they'll chase.
Yeah.
Similar thing. You just want to be as calm and assertive as you can. If you get overly aggressive, that can sometimes trigger like a defensive behavior from the shark.
Yeah.
But assertive with them.
Right.
And over time, the different body language of the different kind of species and when they're aggravated and when they're calm. Fin a good one to keep an eye out for when they bring their fins down underneath their body vertically. That allows them to maneuver a lot quicker. So as soon as you see a shark bring its fins down, that means it's thinking about trying to do something.
Okay. What do you do then though? Like, do you back off or you hold your ground? Like, what's the...
And if they're getting really aggressive, you stay as assertive as you can, kind of work as a group, bring the boat over and then relocate.
Okay, you try to like bully it with the boat.
Essentially, you just want to always be as calm as you physically can be so that they're second guessing.
Yeah, okay, right. I mean, how do you... So I guess you can tell you're being too aggressive if they start changing their body language and getting tight, or...
Sometimes you'll swim over and give them a poke to kind of tell them to go away. And most of the time, they'll kind of flinch a little bit and swim off.
Right.
If you really hard or if you're being particularly aggressive, sometimes they'll get that poke, flinch, and then turn and come straight back really quickly. Yeah. So yeah, just finding that, which can take a little bit of time. Otherwise, like anything, even with a person, if you escalate the situation, it can end poorly as well.
Yeah, I guess. It's like there's a gentle slap's one thing and a great big ringing one across the face is quite another.
Yes.
Right. Wow. So do you guys ever carry any of the gear that people say protects you from sharks, or you just deal with behavior, you know, like...
Behavior these days. I've tried a few of the different bits of equipment, like the shark shield ones, the electric free. We trialed those when they first came out, and they would deter a shark once it got close enough to you with that electric pulse. Right. I've trialed the different magnetic ones, and so far I haven't seen much of a difference in behavior in the sharks, but I'm guessing that's because the magnetic ones are designed to put off an unusual magnetic field when they get really close to the body. And I can see how that someone who's surfing or out of the water and it's just coming up to look at a leg and then gets that magnetic field and weird. Whereas when you're wearing it in the water spearfishing, the shark can still see you in your whole body line and go, that shape is spearfisherman. So even though it still gets that weird magnetic signal, it's not actually hurting or interfering with the shark. So I magnetic ones work particularly well with spearfishing, but I can't say they work.
No, right. Yeah. I mean, the magnetic ones that I've seen footage of, like for the line fishers, it's basically got to brush across the shark's face to deter them. So you've got to rig them up a certain way so they're like flopping around near the fish. So, I mean...
Yeah, I like the idea. And where they've been trialing the large magnetic, not a net, but like a magnetic fence, and they're huge, run from the bottom of the seabed to the surface.
Oh, wow.
Big pulse that comes off that has been working to deter sharks, but the small ones that fit on your wrist or your ankle, I just don't think there's enough kind of there. Yeah. Whereas the electronic ones, the ones that are battery powered and send out that alternating frequency, you can see when the shark gets close enough that it doesn't like that, it will tend to back off. And there are very large versions of those, but they're incredibly expensive for use back of your boat. But I think they'd just be too dear for your average consumer.
Yeah, right. Like as a commercial diver, you might have one strapped to your back, but...
Oh, no, well, individual diver, you've got your normal unit. I think they're around the $700 mark, but they have developed with a power source that's like...
Oh, my. Wow.
Like snorkeling charter operators, and they throw it off the back of the boat, and that sends out a field that's about 30 meters wide instead of a level 3 meter. But I think they're like, I don't know. I can't remember. I know they're over $10,000. So I think it'll be a bit expensive to throw out off the back of your boat. Like,
yeah. And they've got a big dome of safety.
About 30 meters of water, throw it out. You can just fish in the field without having to.
Goodness.
But-
Well,
but-
I mean,
Or it's like the electric fence. The bull will be deterred 99 times out of 100, but occasionally it can be true.
Yeah. It's like, it's not actually physically hurting it. It's just disconcerting up until the point that it finds a reason to go through it. Yeah.
The collars you put on a dog to stop them barking, and occasionally the dog just barks anyway.
Yeah. It's like, I don't like the citronella. Oh,
Go away.
yeah. So do you find that actually, like, with the shark tags and stuff, do the fish behave any different? Like around here?
Most fish don't seem to be worried about the electric pulse going through the water that I've noticed. The magnetic one doesn't seem to affect fish at all, but it also doesn't affect the sharks so much either. However, they have done studies that prove that it has a certain effect, but I don't know if it works well for spearfishing per se. I shouldn't say that. Tells them. So if you want to buy one, I can definitely sell you one. But as far as they don't have a great effect while spearfishing, but as something to give you peace of mind, you're more than welcome to buy one.
Yeah, right. I mean, like a lot of these technological innovations, it's all stepwise, right? Like the first wheel was a really crappy wheel. It was square and it was made of stone, and it just wasn't very good.
Definitely no. And there have been a few improvements over the years. Like there was one shark deterrent that was like the shark shield but smaller and more compact, and it worked really well for about 3 months. And then the 2 little electrodes actually wore through the internal insulation and would just start shocking your wrist.
Nice.
Looked like it was going to be a product, and then after it had been used for a while, it had problems, and that one kind of ended up back on the cutting room floor. And it like you say, it will eventually evolve and become something I think that will be easily utilized by more people. But at the moment, it's a bit gangly, particularly the one with the long tendril, which works very well, but then the tendril gets stuck on things while you're diving and it tangles up. And so at the moment, it definitely helps. And if you are worried about sharks, I would look at getting one of the electronic deterrents, probably not the magnetic ones, but it also has its side effects, its drawbacks.
Yeah, of course. Right. Cool. Good to know.
That's all
right. I had a question in the back of my head just now.
That's all right. There's also the visual deterrents that people are trying using these days, the big eyeballs they've been putting on things.
Yeah, do they work?
I don't know. I think the ones possibly on the mask strap, so that it actually looks like the back of your head, that may work. The big ones, when I stuck them on my fins, actually seem to attract more sharks, but that was because at flick, you've got this white disc flicking on the end of the fin.
Right, but it's not good enough. It can see a pupil and an iris.
So when I had eyes on the same fin, that didn't cause too much of an issue, but when I had one eye on each fin, I was actually getting more sharks. So like, if you use it in a way that it actually looks like where your eyes should be, that's
I would have thought like
the thinking about.
I would have thought painting a pair on your shoulder blades or something would work pretty well.
Because I noticed one shark in particular, the tiger shark, you'll notice will come in and actually swim around you and pay attention to which way you face, and then the next time it comes in where you weren't facing from, so it'll then come in the second behind you. So that tiger sharks in particular will gauge where you're looking from. They're clever. So I'm assuming that for something like a tiger that had eyes on the back, it couldn't then work out which way to snip.
I've heard whites can be a bit like that too, but I wouldn't want to try it.
Not sure. They always tend to come in on the surface first and have a look, and then they'll come up from on the opposite side to the sun. They're quite clever hunters. They'll always use the angle of the sun to make their approach so that they can see with the angle of the sun, but you can't see through it. They'll always come up that kind of curtain of light between you and them. They're clever. They're very clever.
It's almost like they've had to do that a few times.
Well, I'm assuming that's how they catch certain other ocean-going mammals unaware. Particularly in the morning with that high angle of sunlight, If you're under that sun looking up, you can see fine. If you're above it looking down through the curtain, you can't actually see very far.
No, and you're just this big black silhouette.
Yeah, certainly gives something an advantage coming up.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
You also use that to your advantage. You learn to look with the sun instead of looking against the sun. And you can learn a lot from watching the other predators in the water.
Right. Wow, that's awesome. I mean, all makes so much sense when you say it, but stuff that would take you years to learn on your own. You know?
When you're up diving, if you're swimming around an area and there aren't many fish and you see a shark heading north, your best chance of fish is to go north, because the shark's going to go to where the shark knows there's some food. It's not going to hang around in an area where there's nothing to eat.
Right.
So a lot of the time, fishermen will actually follow sharks to find where the fish are.
Course,
so
right.
They try and steal our fish, we try and steal their fish. It's give and take.
Competition.
Pretty much.
On a fair playing field.
Yeah, when you're spearfishing, it's more you putting yourself into their food chain and more than them being part of ours. So yeah, it's more us. It's more spearfishermen trying to steal the shark's fish more than the shark trying to steal.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's a real key difference. Yeah. I now remember my question. Have you done much of that spearfishing where you're like just floating around, scraping up bits of burley and stuff like that to attract pelagics?
These days, we've had to modify how we do our chumming. Unfortunately, to sharks then associating divers with giving away all these little tasty bits of food. So what we use nowadays is we'll tear up newspaper and kind of crush it into what looks like a chunk of fish, because the shark will come in, look at it and go, that's not fish, and then kind of swim off. Whereas your sight predators like Spanish and jobfish and wahoo will still come in paper, and they won't hang around, but at least they'll still come in and have a look, but then the sharks aren't sitting there constantly eating.
Really clever.
So try and modify how we do things. So we're still working sight sense, but we're not bringing sharks in, because they can smell it when you start cutting up fish from much. They see it. Yeah. It gives you a bit more to get the fish before the sharks kind of realize what's happening.
Yeah. I'd imagine like having your hand just smell of blood and oil would not be terribly helpful either.
We experimented in my youth of soaking our wetsuits in tuna oil to see if we could get more fish to come in, and it worked really well, but it attracted all of the fish. So we just had shark all day. But yes, as an experiment, I can say that worked very well to get Spanish and wahoo and your pelagics in, but you couldn't shots, because every time you turn around and there'd be a shark kind of smell through the water.
Of course. So, I assume you stopped doing that when you got a girlfriend.
Oh no, we stopped doing that the next day. That was unsuccessful experiment. We're like, well, for a fact, we know that this will attract fish. Yeah. But like which fish, unfortunately.
To what end? Yeah. That's hilarious. You're so lucky you didn't get hurt.
Oh no, we were like with the people in the water, everyone watching each other's back. It wasn't too bad, and the sharks were more coming in on that scent and then going, "That's not a tuna."
Yeah, right. Of course.
Away. So shark, and that comes back to those deterrent features. They will usually run through all their senses and see what they're trying to go after, smell it, sense it, and they go through, or they kind of make that charge.
The decision, right? I mean, that makes sense. I think that's what most animals do, right? Like humans do it all the time. But if a piece of lettuce smelled like bacon, you'd sort of wonder what the heck it was.
100%. You pick it up and you're like, this milk smells odd. Right. I might not drink.
Yeah. I mean, it's still white and it's still liquid like milk, but it doesn't smell right.
Senses quite right. So normally, and I say normally because, like we were saying before, there's always that 1% in all animals and people, and that aren't quite right.
Yeah, but try it anyway.
But for the majority of sharks, if one thing doesn't add up, they'll usually pull away and then reconsider and think it through and try and work out what's actually going on. But after a while, they started going, we might have a look at this anyway. So by that point, we just took our suits off and we were just diving in our undies for the rest of the day, just because it was getting a little bit too...
Yeah, a little bit too enthusiastic.
Oh, well, like anything, you're anxious and a little bit apprehensive about something you don't understand at the start, but once that's been around you for a while, it stops being as unusual, and then you can kind of. So same with sharks. Once it stopped being, oh, that's a bit weird, to, well, they've been hanging around for a while and they still smell like food. Then started to kind of ramp up there.
Right.
But they just get closer and closer, and they were just kind of testing boundaries.
So, I mean, how many fish do you tend to lose to sharks, or do you lose any fish to sharks anymore?
I still lose it. These days, I'm a lot more selective with my shot placement. So I always, if I can't get a really good shot that will hurt the fish or slow the fish or kind of kill the fish very quickly, I'll tend not to take too many shots that the fish will be able to run, and then the shark can get to the fish before I can. But I was starting out, I'd lose a few more because I'd just take longer shots and more difficult shots, and the fish would have time to run or get tangled up on the bottom. And that's when you really had the sharks come in. These days, I don't lose too many. I lose the occasional one when it does get caught in a cave and I can't get back to it and kind of free it in time. That's just something that has slowly occurred with time and getting more selective with the shots you take.
Yeah, okay.
And diving with people that will then back you up and come down and kind of make the fish more difficult for the shark to get. That also helps as well. But when you definitely lose a lot more fish to sharks.
Okay, and that's mostly down to, taking those shots that you probably shouldn't take.
Yeah, just the fish having time to run and then the shark having time to come in on the fish. Once you got a little bit more time and ability and you're not as stressed about getting the fish, and you can kind of pick your shots, you can get it up before the sharks had kind of come through.
Yeah, right. Well, you're just like, I'm coming back next week. There's no point me killing this wahoo because the shark's going to eat it.
Hurt you, I'll swim up, take a breath, and if you're still here when I come back, I'll try and go for
reassess. Yeah. Okay.
Like what you get told when you're a teenager. Plenty of fish in the sea. It's the same thing. You're telling yourself, oh, there'll be another one of these.
Yeah. But teenagers don't never take that message to heart, do they?
No, it's this fish now, and I must.
This is the only fish for me. Yeah.
On both, I was a teenager and when I was starting spearfishing, that you don't see the leaves for the tree kind of thing. You get super focused fish on that one day, and you get a little bit overexcited, and you finish the same as when you're a teenager.
Well, with age becomes a bit more wisdom, I guess, in that sense. Yeah. So let's talk about catch management. Like once you've shot that fish, once you and your mates have made sure the sharks stay away while you get the fish off the spear, what do you do to stop the sharks eating it or getting attracted by it?
It depends. So if we're diving from a boat, we always have one person in the boat. Wherever, always try and have one person in the boat. And as soon as you've got the fish up, brained the fish as quickly as you can so it's not moving around, and dispatch the fish. Then we'll put that fish in the boat straight away and just getting it out of the water. When I'm shore diving or doing competition diving, we tow large floats essentially that we can then put the fish inside of the float, close the float, and then that float tows behind us so that the fish is out of the water, not caused. When I first started, you could string the fish on your rig line and have it float behind you in the water, and the sharks weren't as onto it back then. That meant that they could get a really easy fish. Unfortunately, nowadays they've learnt that if you look 30 meters behind the diver and they're pulling a rope, there could be a fish there, and they'll actually go and investigate the floats these days. So I think we underestimate their ability to learn, like you were saying before. They're very clever.
Yeah. The smooth stingrays even down here do that now. Like my friends they have to manage their catch differently when the big black stingrays are around, because they'll have shot a morwong or something and it'll be in the catch bag under the float like 15 minutes behind, and then they'll notice their ropes tugging at their leg and they're like, what the heck? And this 150 kilo stingray has flattened itself over the back and it's dragging it down. Like, just big flapjack.
Yeah, we're definitely putting ourselves in their food web, and once they get clever it out, they know isn't the easiest way to get it.
Yeah. So, when you get those, like say you shoot a grouper or a tusk fish or something and it bolts straight back into the cave, have you had sharks like shove you out of the way to go get it? Or
Occasionally, it's more, usually when you get shoved, it'll be when you've dove down to, so as soon as that happens on the way up, your dive buddy will let you know, and then you try and dive down to free it as quickly as possible. And it's usually when you've gone down to free their fish, because then in the shark's mind, you're both going for that same fish in that same hole, and then its behavior becomes a little bit more to push you out of the way so that it can then get that fish. So when, you'll tend to be more in those, not aggressive, but kind of communicational stances.
Yeah.
When you're going up someone else's fish to free it. And that's between you or push you out of the way or do those kind of things.
And then it's just jab it with the spear gun and make it go away, sort of thing.
So you're then assertively saying, no, this is my fish, while they're doing, you kind of have discussion that they win or you win, and you go from there. But it's just reading the situation. Occasionally one will come in really heavily and be like, no, this is mine, and you give it a few good pokes and it keeps pushing you off. And at that point, you kind of have to accept the fact that it's much better at being underwater than you are.
Yeah.
You kind of have to, you do your very best, but you don't win that one, kind of thing.
No,
you just and poke it and try and make it more difficult for it to get that fish, but you know that shark isn't going to change its mind. It's still going to go for that.
Right. Yeah, if he really wants it, he really wants it. Right.
No matter how hard you poke that shark, it is still going to win. And you just go, oh, well, I'll just make it difficult, but yeah, you win.
Do you ever get, do you ever have encounters with the less traditional species that are associated with shark-based depredation, like wobbegongs and things like that? Do they ever present any issues?
During the daytime, you don't have too many issues with wobbegongs. Back when we used to do a lot of night diving for crayfish, you'd have to be more careful for wobbies. They're a lot more active at night. So if you were in the hole holding onto the crayfish and it was really putting up a fight, you'd find wobbegongs would come along the wall and actually go into that hole on the sound of that trying to wrestle out.
The flap.
Yeah, that kind of creaking sound that they make. So at night, we used to have more wobbegong issues if you kind of got stuck with a cray in a hole, and they'd come in and then obviously, it's like ringing the bell. You're like, the crayfish is in this hole. Yeah. And they'd go, oh, thank you.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't know that one was there. Thank you.
Oh, that's sweet.
Right.
Not too bad with wobbegongs during the day. They seem to be a little bit more lethargic. You can almost shoot the fish next to them, and they're not really too stressed.
Right. Okay.
Essentially, I think they might be a bit more nocturnal. I can't say that for sure, but I've certainly noticed that they're a lot more active when you're diving at night. But we can't spearfish at night up here, so it could be very different if you had shot a fish at night with shark. And it's also at night you can't see the sharks. All you can see is your beam of light of the torch. So there could be other sharks there. No.
That doesn't sound like a nice thing to do.
Or everything that's in the black, it's different. It's very eerie and enjoyable after a while, but the first time it's a bit scary. And your whole just becomes what's in that circle of light from your torch, and everything else you just have to completely ignore and not think about.
Yeah. There's a lot of like accept your vulnerability going on.
Pretty much.
Like
what's that torch light?
Yeah.
I remember.
I have friends who enjoyed night diving, and like the GTs and things would just blast in from nowhere to eat the little reef fish that they were spotting in their beams. And it was just like, oh, okay, they're clearly not the only predators around.
It's like faith. You have faith that they're there, and they're can't see them, so it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. They haven't felt motivated enough to make their presence felt yet, so you're probably okay.
I was diving on one night and a huge grey flash took up the entire torch beam and then went past. And I was very scared for a short moment. and then the face of a dolphin came back up into the tour. So there was about a 12-second window. I was like, yep, I'm dead. I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it. And then the dolphin's just like, what are you doing here?
Flipper.
And just follow us along. And every time a squid would come up into the light, it would just appear from nowhere and hit the squid. Come back on.
Clever.
Yeah, a few clever animals in the water.
Yeah, that's actually awesome. So, I mean, actually, that's something we don't really talk about much. Like in terms of diving for invertebrates, you know, like your crays and slipper lobsters and things like that. Do you find you ever get shark-based depredation during the day doing that?
Not so much whilst you're going for them. One thing you will get sharks come in very heavily on is if you take the antenna from the crayfish or the tropical rock lobsters up here and that up in mid-water, like looking for pelagics, that creaking sound will bring a lot of sharks in very quickly if it's in the middle of nowhere out in like 20 meters of water up on the surface.
So that sound attracts pelagic fish as well, does it? Like that?
One thing we found over the years is sound works really well, particularly for Spanish and wahoo. So that antenna creak will bring Spanish and wahoo in, but also sharks. The other one you can use is an old drink bottle and crinkle the drink bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I seem to really enjoy that as well. Yeah. So it's one of those things. You actively attract the fish you want, but you also attract the fish that you didn't want.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. The other predators that also like vulnerable things.
I like that sound. I'll come see what that is.
Yeah. It's there's an injured prey animal. Wow.
There's a crayfish mid-water. My lucky day.
Yeah. Actually, my diving mates used to tell me about the bottling trick that they do to attract the big sharks for the tourists.
Oh no, yeah, it would work for sharks. It also works well for Spanish, but once you've done it, you're not going to land that Spanish that kind of comes in.
Do you find it's usually the big sharks that rock up too when you do the bottling trick, or there's just whatever's around?
You're up on the reef. It's usually a large number of little reef sharks tend to come up and want to kind of swarm you in numbers. Down on Brisbane, it's usually more the bigger sharks that'll come in first.
Oh, lovely.
They tend to be, I don't know if it's because they're larger that they're less apprehensive, but you'll usually see larger before the smaller ones come in.
Okay. Right. No, I mean, that makes sense. They're less vulnerable to harm, so they could just barge the little guys out of the way.
No, you definitely know when a shark comes in and is sizing you up. It's like, you're about this long, I'm about this long, you'll fit. That kind of thing.
That's so cool. I mean, it would be intimidating the first time, I guess, anyway.
After a while, it's like anything, you don't become accustomed to it, and you should never be ignorant of them or ignore them. You always have to be cautious, keep an eye on them, but you do become a lot more comfortable around them after a while.
Right. I mean, so I guess let's have a think about what we would tell someone who just wants to get into spearfishing, right? Like is new to it, etc. What would you suggest they do to keep themselves safe in the short, medium, and long term?
The same thing for spearfishing that we recommend for everyone is always dive minimum as a pair. If you're on your own, one-on-one with another predator, particularly a shark, you're never going to be able to watch 360 degrees. You're never going to be able to have superior numbers kind of thing. So it's diving with a buddy, and just not diving alone would be the number one bit of recommendation we could give anyone. If you're doing a lot of shore diving, look at investing in getting a float that you can keep the fish up and out of the water. And if you don't want to get one, you can build them pretty cheaply. If you get an old boogie board and 2 pool noodles and just zip tie the 2 pool noodles to the front of the boogie board, and then stick a hessian sack on top, you can make one of those for about $8-9. And that's a way that then you can tow and keep your fish up and out of the water, and just every so often put water across the hessian, and then the wind cools it, stops your fish from kind of getting cooked. And just by keeping your fish out of the water, diving with a buddy, you'll be a lot less inclined to have those sharks being drawn in from further afield because they can't smell the fish. The other one would be to, as much as possible, just remain calm. The calmer you can be, the calmer the predator will be. It's no different to when you're training a dog. The calmer you are, the calmer the dog's going to be as you're having that interaction. So the calmer you can be, the better. What would be the other one? There was another one I was trying to think of, and I forgot while I was talking. Fish out of the water, diving as a buddy, being calm. If you do want to invest in a shark shield, you're more than welcome to. That is a good way for you to protect your person directly. One side effect you'll notice with the shark shields is because you're putting that signal out, you will see a few more sharks while you're using it. They won't come as close, but because that signal's going out, they can feel that from further away, and they'll investigate what it might be.
Right.
So that people diving with the person with the shark shield tend to see a lot more sharks during the day.
So they're like just punching up on the edge of the dome.
Essentially, you stay close, because if you're like outside of that 3 meter bubble and the shark's coming in to see what that signal is advertising and being pumped out all over the place, if you're outside of that, they'll come in and be like, oh, I don't like that guy, but you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And then investigate someone, they'll the person that's not putting off that signal. So shark shields are really good for the individual, not so good for the group.
Yeah. Okay.
But no, three main ones, particularly with sharks, is just be calm. Sorry, that was the other one. Make it difficult. If they do come in to take your catch, try and make it as difficult for them as you can. You don't want to make an easy meal, because the easier it is, the more likely they are to do it to the next guy that comes along who might not know that those sharks are in the area, and the next one and the next one. So if everyone is kind of assertive and without putting yourself at risk, making it as difficult as you can be for them, even if you don't end up winning your fish back, you just want them to always second guess trying to take that fish from the diver.
Right. It's just not as easy as you would think.
Oh, yeah. No, like if you had to run a 100-meter sprint and do 10 hurdles to get into McDonald's, you'd probably go to KFC.
Yeah. And if someone was poking you in the face while you're trying to eat your Macca's, go somewhere else.
Like in the area where I live, which isn't the highest socioeconomic area, the joke is always make your house just look more difficult to break into than the neighbors, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Just want them to think that there's an easier option somewhere else, and then they'll hopefully go and
you don't have to outrun that lion. You just have to be able to run faster than your mate.
Oh no, my daughter knows that. She tells me all the time. She'll be fine.
She'll climb a tree or something.
You, Dad, it's fine.
So would you suggest people join a club too? Do you think that kind of...
For just information and to meet people, and it's a really good way to get into the sport. We're very lucky now that the Sunshine Coast Club has opened up again around Queensland, so we've got two options near either north or south of Brisbane. Sydney's great. New South Wales has lots of clubs. New South Wales is very good. But yeah, if you can join a club, I would recommend it, just purely for the information that you can learn from the guys who have been doing it for usually longer than you've been alive. Is exponential.
That's awesome. Final question. What kinds of information do you think we need to gather around shark-based depredation? Like what kinds of information do you think would help us do it even better, like to prevent depredation from happening?
It's a tricky one, just because for line fishermen it's difficult for them to see what's going on underneath them. So that would be one bit of information spear fishermen kind of learn, and it's through clubs and through talking to people, is areas where sharks particularly frequent, and you kind of can tell each other this area, because of XYZ, there's a lot of sharks there, like the Fraser area where the skippers clean the decks. And over people just kind of stop hitting those areas, and then it's not so bad. You can kind of share your information, and it makes it easier. I don't know how line fishermen would. It would be very difficult, but if they could make it more difficult for the sharks to catch the fish off them, then they'd have less. The other one that they could try, but this would purely be a hypothetical, and I'd like to be able to experiment with it myself, is if you with your motor would go shark fishing on one day and then go back to that same reef the next day to go line fishing for normal fish, whether you would have the same interactions with those sharks, or whether those sharks would start. Because yesterday, 3 of them got pulled up and didn't have. So that would be one experience to do, is physically fish sharks for 2 to 3 days, then go back to that same reef and fish for fish and see if the sharks still behave as aggressive for catch.
Yeah.
Had a few days being caught themselves. But I don't do very much line fishing, so I haven't been able to do that experiment as yet. But I think that would be certainly an interesting one to look into. But I don't know if the environmentalists would enjoy that particular experiment too much.
Probably
I don't
not.
mean like sharks, but just recreational catch and release.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's pretty well documented that the act of catch and release causes stress, like even in something as tough as a shark. So do that
I
a
got
few
hooked.
times.
I got hooked by accident years ago, and just by the time I managed to like work out what was going on and fighting against that person reeling me in, it is tiring. So no, I personally feel that it could, by having a larger amount of recreational shark fishing, could help with depredation, but I don't fact-based to kind of base that off. That would just a hypothetical that I would like to experiment with.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting as an idea. Yeah, I
Because
mean,
it's off what I've noticed, because when we started diving the Tweed, there was no shark fishing, and as soon as you hit the water, sharks would come straight up, and you'd automatically be into that kind of working against the sharks. They were following the boats. And then there was about 7 years of commercial shark fishing, and you saw almost no sharks around because they were staying away from the boats. And then they started fishing, and within about 2 to 3 years, those sharks' behavior went back to how it was before the shark fishing.
Yeah,
So
I mean, that makes sense. Like, you know, boat noise equals set net equals death. Like, let's just not.
Face, and then for half an hour to an hour, get dragged around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sort of, it does exactly what you were talking about with the don't make it easy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like now you're paying for that meal.
Boat noise with a free feed. You're then they associate the boat noise with getting hooked and having a bad day.
Stress. Yeah.
I can't say for sure whether that would work, but it would certainly be something that would be an interesting experiment to see if it did change the shark's behavior.
It would be. I mean, our app is designed to at least gather that spot information and time of year and stuff like that. So we're hoping to build a database so that people who use that app can just hop on and be like, oh, okay, like you said with the Fraser place, it's like, don't go here.
Helpful. So, for instance, off North Stradbroke, when the mat tuna run, you will have whalers cruising through, and you just don't land any fish for about 2 weeks. Even spearfishing, you'll go out and the fish will come through, and as soon as you take a shot, there's already 10 sharks there, and they're following migratory tuna. So for those few weeks, we go to Moreton instead, and then once they run, then we'll go back. So an app like that would certainly be helpful to people, just to kind of, you can look it up and go, oh, for these 2 weeks, let's just say not Flat Rock, the one near it, Sevens, is going to have 100 sharks on it. Nah, it's not worth it. I'll go somewhere.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, there were a few papers that were documenting longliners basically took that approach because obviously if they wind up with all their tuna getting eaten off their hooks, it's pretty bad for business.
Very bad for business.
And you can't really deter the sharks from eating a bait that a swordfish or a tuna would want to eat. So they basically decided they just take really detailed logs and fish different places on a seasonal basis.
Oh no, and it's a great way, even with any fish, if you keep, like every time you go out, you come home and you write down what the moon phase was, the tide, the wind, the current. Over time, you'll start to notice quite a few patterns. So I can't see why it wouldn't work for sharks as well. To the opposite side, instead of trying to see what patterns you're looking for the fish, learn which patterns to not go to that area because it's going to be particularly sharky would make sense.
Yeah. Or I mean, learn about what sharks are using to their advantage, like with that window of light thing. That's pretty cool.
I know. active right closer to your sunrise and sunset, because it just makes it much easier to hunt because of the curtain. The downside, because it makes it much easier for the spear fishermen to hunt too. So it's getting that trade-off.
Yeah. It's mutually beneficial to any visual predator.
That's when your jobfish and your jacks and all of your more sight-based hunters will be most active, apart from full moon. And full moon.
Well, that's all of my questions, Trevor. Were there any last things you would like to say?
Oh, not that I can think. No, thanks for the chat. Hopefully, even though I'm not qualified anywhere scientifically, hopefully I've assisted some people and done what I can for you.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, this podcast isn't about just interviewing scientists. It's about interviewing people like yourself with just long experience in and around sharks in the water and your experiences, I guess, around that area as well. It's absolutely what it's about, because they complement each other. Most scientists, and I know some scientists are supremely good spearfishers, but most scientists don't spend anywhere near as much time in the water as you do. So what you've got to say just adds value to the kinds of research they do, which is exactly the point.
It's good as a spear fisherman to be able to try and help scientists at times. I know there a particular the Queensland Record Officer, Mick McDade. He works with Jeff at Queensland Museum quite a bit, and because he can then get the exact samples that Jeff needs, and they work with each other, and they're both wealths of knowledge that I often harass when it's something I don't know enough about. So it's always good to be able to work with the scientific community. It's a lot from them as well, a lot.
Thank you very much for your time.
Sometimes they don't want to share too much information because you might go and accidentally eat their research subject. But normally
that happens. Yeah. Or you'll be like, hey, I shot this really cool thing, and they'll be like, oh my God, we've not seen one in 40 years. Do you want to know where it was?
I'll just, you have the, sorry about that.
I think I've still got a fillet at home.
Do have that occasionally. I know I had to take a particular rock cod that I shot because it didn't quite identify one way or another into the museum, so they could do DNA to work out what it was. And very similar. I've shot this, I don't know what it is, and they're like, oh, we're not real sure what that is. Just bring it in. So
oh, look, it's a new species.
It turned out to be what we all kind of thought it was genetically, but it had the incorrect fin rake count and dorsal fin and slightly wrong. It's just
just a little bit deformed.
But yes, genetically it was the fish that we all thought.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, that's not as exciting as a new species, but still it could have been.
You never know. There's a surgeonfish that's now called McDade, and that through Mick looking into it and taking samples through, they actually found out that it wasn't. They had two different unicorn surgeons as the one species, and they worked out that they were two separate ones. So he ended up getting to name his own species.
Sweet. Yeah.
So it can have enough time, anal enough to sit there with every fish and count the scales and things like that. You might have
and the gill rakers.
Yeah. But I'm not that ill yet. Maybe when I'm a bit older.
Oh, well, you can always just give them the head and they can do it.
They're too busy. Poor scientists. They never. One thing I do feel sorry for them, they never have enough funding to be able to study as in depth as they would like.
Especially in the fields of taxonomy.
No, we could be a lot ahead if we perhaps put a bit more money into science and slightly less money into shooting things.
Yeah.
That's a whole different discussion.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Trevor. That was fantastic. I'm just going to stop the recording.
Too easy.